So, Bryony, yes, here you are now. What is it? A year into ISCF?
Yes, yes.
Is it literally a year?
Just over. So we started in July last year.
Oh wow, yeah, that's well over. Yeah, and how much longer is it until?
To March 2024.
24. Okay, so you're what, a quarter of the way through or something?
Indeed, yes.
Oh wow, time goes quick. So, how did you come to be here as Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge Director? When did you first get interested in decarbonisation, would you say?
Gosh. Well, I started out in the nuclear industry, so you feel you have an inherent interest in clean energy, and then moved into, just moved into this field through, the jobs that I took on really, and haven't moved away since.
Yeah, that's good. And when did you become aware of CCS in that then?
Well, I guess really about the time that I'd moved to Doosan to lead their research centre. And of course, they are very active in CCS pilot scale facilities. So that was really my first inkling of what this was all about.
That was when?
Oh, gosh. Well, more than 10 years ago.
More than 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've seen the ups and downs of CCS over that time, I would say.
I have, yes, yes, especially the downs of bidding into various large competitions and being totally unsuccessful many years in a row. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, without sort of putting you on the spot, or maybe even jumping ahead to what you're going to say, what do you think is different this time?
Well, I'm hoping that as I go through this presentation, we're just going to see a huge surrounding support for what we're doing. I do feel that there's a lot of political support, and I think, industry's got the message that, we're ready to deploy rather than trial things. So I think it just feels a much more positive story now.
Yeah, and how much do you think Norway's helping? Because they seem they've had their own problems with the moon landing, but they appear to have got it together now.
Yes, and of course it's great to have some flagship projects underway, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And Netherlands, do you think that's getting much attention in the UK? Because they also seem fairly organised, and the thing that impresses me is their port authorities that are doing it are government owned, so they can just get on with it.
Yes, I think we very much recognise that there's lessons to be learned from there, and that we should try to learn those lessons rather than just get on and do our own thing regardless. So yeah, it's an important point, I think.
But do you think our politicians are noticing those countries, or?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think they still believe we're the best in the world at what we do, don't you think?
Well, we maybe are, but
nothing to learn from anybody else. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah. No, I just wondered though that it always seems helpful to, if you think there's somebody else who's taken the plunge into investing in CCS, I think it can't but be helpful anyway. Yeah. No. Okay. So, I just asked you one other thing. I asked you this last time, but I'll ask you again because maybe it's different. What's been most different doing this job from what you expected it to be, would you say?
Gosh.
What's been most surprising that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, there's so much actually. I think one of the things that was quite odd for me is that when I started on this challenge and I thought everyone would be super excited about it, I was surrounded by huge amounts of negativity on you're not doing the right thing, we want something else, blah, blah, blah. And that was all really quite surprising. But I do feel that has changed so much over the last few months. And I do think we've got a great community of people who are really engaged in what we're trying to do. So I think we've moved from sort of surprise at the beginning and then that kind of going away at the moment, which is good.
Oh, that's very good. Okay, right. Well, I think we're ready to hear the latest with the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge. And thanks again for coming to talk to us about it when you're so busy.
My pleasure. And I really appreciate the invitation. I was a bit worried about giving this talk because I was very pleased to be invited to speak to you in April this year. And I was kind of thinking nothing much has changed since then. But one of the great things about putting together some messages for you all today was actually seeing quite a lot has changed, even if the slides haven't changed ever so much. But there has been a lot happening over the last 6 months. So what I'm going to try to take you through is what is it we're trying to achieve in the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, and what have we done so far, and how did we do it, and what have we delivered, and then what goes next. So first of all, what are we trying to achieve? It's really summed up in these two mission statements, really. So we first of all got the BEIS Industrial Clusters mission statement. So this is what government's trying to achieve, is establishing the world's first net zero cluster by 2040 and at least one low carbon cluster by 2030. That's a very clear ambition that we're all very well aware of. And within the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, you can see that our view of what it is that we're trying to do very closely mirrors that broader government mission. So what we're seeing in terms of what we're trying to achieve is delivering that broader outcome through the work we do in our challenge. Obviously, we're not the whole of that outcome, but we are a really important foundation for getting to net zero by 2040. And key to doing that is the enabling infrastructure at scale element of our Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, which is absolutely crucial. So we do see ourselves as paving the way towards having a world first net zero cluster and supporting decarbonisation of UK industry in a cost-effective way, doing everything at scale, not treating it as a demonstration. So an overview of what it is we're trying to deliver is complete change in how we develop our low carbon future, supporting the ambition of net zero in the UK by 2050. And we're trying to do all of this by developing new technologies and infrastructure, but at the same time, making sure that UK industry is attractive for investment, not shutting everything down, but actually making sure that we do decarbonise our industrial regions and that they're seen as attractive rather than sort of dying areas. So that's really important to us in terms of an outcome for the challenge. And we believe that what we're delivering in essence is boosting the development of low carbon technologies, and that we will increase the competitiveness of these key industrial regions through what we do. So in terms of what we've done so far is we've designed 3 work streams for the programme. So we've got a total budget of £170 million of public funding, and we have to more than match that through funding from industry. And what we've been doing is really designing these 3 strands. And I thought what might be interesting for you is to just hear a little bit about some of the processes that go into designing and delivering these, because it's all behind the scenes. And John asked what was surprising for me about this job, and of course one of the things that's really surprised me is the element of behind the scenes work that actually is done to deliver anything on this scale. It requires many people and many processes to be adopted in a sensible way. So broadly, and this is a summary of quite complicated set of processes, but what we have to start out by doing is design the competition. So in the case of industrial decarbonisation, clearly that's not a simple thing to do. There's many, many views on how we might do it. And we've also got to take into account how much money we've got and all kinds of other factors that need to be taken into account. And then we have to design the competition questions around the overall goal that we're trying to deliver. So we started out by doing that, and then of course we have to launch our competition, make sure everybody knows it's happening and that they apply and submit their proposals. And then we go through what's called the assessment phase. So some of you on the call today have kindly helped us out with this assessment phase. What we really need at this point is people who are able to bring their expert professional judgment to bear on what the proposal is actually telling them, and actually score it in a fair way, and that actually is a quite time-consuming process. So we really appreciate the time that some of you have given to us to make that important part of the process really robust. And what we do in that process is we make sure that we don't have any conflicts of interest. And with a programme on this scale, with so many organisations involved in it, that's actually quite a difficult thing to deliver, because a lot of people are involved in the programme, of course. And then for this industrial decarbonisation challenge, we decided that delivering the outcome based on answering fairly straightforward questions and deliver in a proposal would not be sufficient to get a robust outcome. And so we've introduced an interview stage. So we have the assessment and then the successful proposals going through to an interview, which is a real deep conversation to focus on some of the key issues and make sure we really understand what the proposal is going to deliver. And then out of that, we have the decision on what gets funded. And then we move into the project setup phase. So that's all around getting the contracts in place. It's around getting all the extra documentation we need, more detailed project plans, stuff like that, and then making sure the collaboration agreements are in place. And crucially, in this phase, we don't announce the outcome, because until we've actually got the contracts in place, you know, things can always change and people might pull out, or their finances might not stack up, or various other reasons. So we don't make announcements until we've got a very high level of confidence that the projects are going to go ahead. And then of course we start the projects, and of course, that's not the end of the process that we apply, because we don't leave them to just get on with delivering the project by themselves. We have a very extensive monitoring regime where a monitoring officer and the innovation leads in my team meet with the projects on a regular basis to make sure that they're on track with delivering what we'd expected. And then we also have a very rigorous evaluation process that makes sure that the things we said we'd deliver out of this programme will actually be delivered. And that's all done with external professional evaluators to lead all of that for us. So it's quite a long process. That's why it sometimes takes a while from a competition closing to you actually seeing the results. And so what I want to do now is take you through what we've actually delivered so far. So we've got 3 strands, as I mentioned. One's called cluster plans, one is deployment, and one is the research centre. So I think the first point to make is that all 3 of these strands of the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge are being delivered exactly on time as we had planned at the beginning, which is a tremendous achievement anyway, but a particularly great achievement given the difficult times we're all living through. So this has involved, you know, huge efforts from my team that works on this and from the rest of the organisation, and of course from our expert assessors, and then crucially from the people who actually write the proposals and deliver the projects. So we're really pleased with how things are going so far. So on the roadmaps, which we now call cluster plans, because they're basically a plan for an industrial region. So each project in the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge is developing a cluster plan. And the idea is that this plan will look at what's the ambitious things they could start putting in place to ensure that they decarbonise their region by 2030 and ideally become the first net zero cluster by 2040. This is not a plan that's going to be actually built, but it's supposed to be bringing in as many of the industries in a cluster region that would need to be decarbonised to achieve net zero, and making sure it's not just the industrial stakeholders who participate, but also organisations such as local government bodies, city councils, many different stakeholder representative groups, and so on, because what we recognise in decarbonisation is that it's not only a technical challenge, it's a massive challenge around social factors. For example, you know, how do we persuade people that they really want to decarbonise and spend more money on things and have pipelines coming through their backyard or whatever it is going to take. So this is about trying to get some real regional thinking. Of course, it's been done in a small way in the past, but these projects are now able to know that they will have funding for a certain period of time and be able to develop a robust plan. So when I spoke to you in April, the statements at the bottom on, you know, we're in progress and we're about to open our stage 2 competitions later on in the year. That's now at this point, they're all complete. Our stage 1 project all finished on time at the end of July. And the stage 2 competitions, which is for the more significant amount of money for each cluster plan, and was only open to people who were successful at the first stage. All of those bids have been submitted and they've also been assessed, and all of the successful projects have been notified that they have been successful. So we know who they are. It's just I can't tell you who they are yet. Okay, but you know, I know many of you are engaged with these cluster plans and supporting them, and we'll have ideas about the projects you're involved in. You'll know whether they're going ahead or not, so that's all good. So moving on to deployment, this is where most of the money is being spent, and it is crucial that the money gets spent on the right things and that we get on with it. So this is really about demonstrating at scale decarbonisation using technologies we know now, because what we're trying to do is the front end engineering design studies, the FEED studies, to understand the costs of these major infrastructure projects, and then where appropriate start looking at early stage implementation of some of these approaches. So I guess what we've seen through the stage 1 projects is that every cluster has usually got some characteristics in common and some points of difference, but they usually have a strong CCS element, and they usually have a pretty strong hydrogen element as well. And then, of course, they have points of difference because of the different industries in each of those regions, all quite different from each other. So this is doing it for real. So we've got to demonstrate we can do this cost effectively. We need infrastructure in place before we can do anything. So we've got to get that right for the region as a whole, not just looking at a single industry requirement. And of course, we've got to think about how we build it all and get the skills in place. So for this competition, again, all of the stage 1 projects were completed on time, which is fantastic. And the proposals have all been prepared, which is why I've marked the competition as sort of complete in that sense, because the proposals were all submitted yesterday as it happened. So I had a really exciting day, just constantly updating my screen to see which projects had come in, and seeing which projects felt that it was a good idea to submit a multi-tens of millions of pounds project just within half an hour of the closing time. And some people somewhat more conservative, and that's all very interesting to see. And then, of course, we're now moving into the same process of assessment and designing the portfolio coming out of that. And then the third strand is, of course, the Research and Innovation Centre strand, where we went through the selection of a research centre champion who would lead the development of a proposal. And that proposal has been submitted and is in the assessment and review stage at the moment. So just a reminder of what we funded out of the stage 1 projects. And I've already said that the only projects that could apply for the major amounts of funding were these. So it wasn't open to anybody else. So you can see that the basis of the future projects is on this slide here. We were pleased with the large number of organisations that participated in these projects. So already we've funded 58 organisations to be developing these cluster plans and deployment projects. And as we move into the next stage, the number of organisations involved is increasing very dramatically. So, for example, in one of our cluster plans for the next stage, we've got 30 different organisations participating in that, which is fantastic to see. Many, many different stakeholders in the region. And I think there's not really much more I can say about this slide. I know you've had presentations from all of the people leading these projects in this series of lectures, so you know what they're about. And of course, they're spread around the major industrial centres of the UK and form a strong basis for designing a set of projects. So I guess the first thing we've delivered so far is those projects being completed. And then in terms of other outcomes that I think we are in the process of delivering, is that the interaction with other sources of funding is much clearer now than it was at the start of the programme. So we've seen that we have hydrogen projects in many of these clusters, and we know that the hydrogen fund has been announced by BEIS. We've also got a strong element of steel production in these clusters, and we know that Clean Steel Fund has been announced. We have the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund announced by BEIS, which is over £300 million worth of investment that they're planning to make. And it is pretty clear that some of that investment will be in these cluster regions. So that will all add to the monies that we have available and help to build these clusters into strong regional entities. And I could not possibly leave talking about alternative sources of funding without mentioning the Transforming Foundation Industries Fund, which Bruce Adley, who's on this call, is leading. And of course, that will help a number of the different kinds of industries in these clusters to think about their energy needs for the future. So what would be super nice is to remind you, though, because John did ask at the beginning about a number of things that I decided to try and cover in this talk, and crucially, I think, you know, the sort of political climate, and is it moving in the right direction? So, in July this year, when we had got the opportunity to announce the sort of latest stages of our cluster plan competition and the plans for the deployment competition, I was kind of working on a little press release, which had just got a little quote from me in it. And, we eventually ended up with the press release coming from number 10 and referring to our competition, which is just amazing. I never imagined that would happen. I mean, it did include a whole load of stuff about Jet Zero and stuff, but it did include our decarbonisation challenge, which is just fantastic to see. And we are seeing across all of government real engagement in talking about CCS much more, and talking about hydrogen much more, and also, of course, talking about the need to develop these technologies as a route to sustainable recovery in the UK. So that's, I think, really positive development. So in terms of winners, I've explained why I can't tell you the outcomes yet. In the case of the cluster plans, they're not yet in contract. And in the case of the deployment projects, they only submitted their bid yesterday. So we've got to go through a process between now and the end of the year to end up with the portfolio of projects. What we're expecting is that the cluster plans will kick off in January next year, and the deployment projects will kick off between January and March next year. So they'll all be underway quite soon. So even though I can't announce the winning projects from the deployment project, or even tell you who's bid, we were able to receive a press release from the Zero Carbon Humber Partnership yesterday, who were feeling that just having submitted their bid was cause for a press release, which is fantastic to see. So I thought I'd just put that in as a slide here, just to give you an example. And they've already announced who are the partners in the project in that press release, so there's no problem in me telling you or sharing you this picture. So, this is just one of the cluster projects who've submitted. They've announced the total value of their bid is around £75 million. They have obviously got many international companies in that region, many heavy industries, and of course they list them all here. So we've got right through from the ports right through to the AMRC at Sheffield University, and a huge range of different kinds of organisations in there across power, and the Equinor plans for salt end and hydrogen production, and of course gas storage, and the massive opportunities for BECCS at the Drax power plant. So it was good to be able to at least show you a slide to give you an idea of the scale of what's being talked about. So that's it really. All I was going to cover now was just to say what's next. So next is actually launching the projects and making sure they deliver what we had hoped for. And that requires, once we get into next year, we'll be working really hard with the projects to make sure that we implement some of the things we said were really key from this programme. Particularly, we're putting a large emphasis on sharing knowledge, and we want to make sure we put the right structures in place to make that possible. And I think there are many opportunities to get involved in the programme. So particularly the cluster plans are very open to new ideas, because that's their job really. It's to think about how they decarbonise their region and which technologies are coming along that they might want to engage with. So I think they'd be very willing to engage more broadly as we move through the next couple of years. And of course, the Research Centre provides opportunities to get involved also. So I think we're going through now the assessment phase, the interviews, designing the portfolio, getting the contracts, and then we start the actual works. It's all tremendously exciting. I think we delivered quite a lot over the last year and a bit, and I look forward to any questions or comments that you've got. Thanks very much.
Hey, thanks very much, Bryony. That's great. So, I guess questions on the chat. Somebody's, Bert has asked, is anyone looking at ammonia fuel? Have you come across that?
No. When we read the proposals, we might see differently, but I'm not seeing it as a theme people have spoken about much, no.
No, that was interesting. It doesn't seem to have come up much in the clusters, does it?
Hmm.
I think it's almost a bit too recent. Do you want to say anything about it, Parvez? No, I'm not seeing him there. Okay, I've got another question. On the clusters, they maybe cover, I don't know, half the country's CO2 emissions. But are you aware? I know it's not your responsibility, but are you aware of anything for the bits in between?
You mean the other industrial regions around the coast, or the other?
No. Sorry, I didn't mean that around the coast. No, I was actually thinking about the rest of the country's emissions that doesn't come from clusters.
Yeah, it's completely outside my remit because delivering this is hard enough, I suppose. I guess we did see in the cluster plans competition one project which was more typical of industrial regions in the Midlands, and I think some lessons might be learned from some of the ideas they put forward in their stage 1 project. But in terms of feeling a responsibility to decarbonise the whole of the UK, definitely not. I think what we do see though is that, for example, when the clusters are getting significant activity in hydrogen production, that they want to interact with neighbouring regions to actually transport the hydrogen to them and understand how it might be used outside their own region. So I guess there is a bit of a link there, but that's about the limit of it. Yeah,
I mean, I was also thinking about, I guess, longer distance pipelines coming from outside the clusters going in, whether that had come up, but it's probably a bit early, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or you know, shipping or road or rail or something. Vincenzo, you got a question about small companies?
Yes, I have a question. So would you consider also the small CO2 emitters in the cluster? So in other words, if you consider the cluster that are, for instance, for the one in the Amber side, they might cover probably 90% of CO2 emitted in the region. Well, what is the idea? How do you have any plan for in the case where there are not such a big emitter, or maybe there is a high quantity of small companies?
Yes, thank you. I think what we're expecting is that these emitters will engage very strongly with the cluster plan for their region, because although they won't be the first projects to develop, for example, carbon capture and storage or start utilising hydrogen, they need to do something. And the cluster plan for the region is the way in which they can get involved and also get educated on what the options are. So we have seen a lot of small companies engaged in the programme, and when we finally are able to announce the winners, there are a number of small companies that are actually partners in the programme and successful already. But you know, the general point is that if you need to decarbonise within a cluster, then getting involved in the cluster plan is the right starting point, I think, and many of these small companies are doing that.
If I may have another question.
Yeah, sure.
How do you think to manage the CO2 quality for that? And do you think there is also opportunity for carbon capture and utilization? I'm still referring a little bit to these small companies rather than large plant.
Yes, I mean, we would certainly expect, for example, that small companies would be looking at utilisation opportunities. So there's nothing in the cluster plans that disincentivises that as an outcome. It's open to any route to decarbonising. So, and some of the projects are already looking at that as an option at a smaller scale. And in terms of managing the CO2 quality, then obviously people will, excuse me, need to be planning for thinking about that as they develop the cluster plan. And what we're expecting to do is to make sure that there's a very close link between the cluster plan teams and the deployment teams, so that the infrastructure recognises the wider opportunities in the region, and they can start thinking about what they need to plan for. So we're trying to make sure we don't build something that's not useful in a broader context.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Bryony, that sort of raises a question, doesn't it? March 2024 is quite soon. What do you think is needed to follow on, assuming things go as well as they can in this present round?
Yes, well, we know that in the last budget, the government announced the CCS Infrastructure Fund we're expecting at least 800 million getting committed to that. So that's the minimum we need to follow on, isn't it? So I think what we are seeing is that, you know, in this program, we're designing the infrastructure, and obviously it'd be a bit sad if it didn't then move to the construction phase, but the amounts of money required at that point are massive. So we need continued government commitment to funding some of these early stage projects, of course.
Yes. How much do you think is going to come through the CFD, or I guess we don't really know what's being talked about for funding industrial capture yet, do we?
No. Of course, there's been many, you might have participated in them yourself, many discussions on what the business model should look like, and extensive engagement with industrial people on what they would like ideally to see. And I suppose, although we don't know what will come out of that, what we do know is that based on what industry has seen of those conversations with government, they have bid into this program. So it's not saying everyone's super happy and confident, but it is saying that as far as we can tell, you know, the early sort of mood music about what's ultimately coming is going to be, you know, something that industry will broadly be neutral or welcoming about. But, you know, obviously it's early days, but we're expecting some sort of more detail on that towards the end of the year, I understand, or early next year. Yeah.
Yes, that's quite important. Oh, well, that's encouraging. And when do you think roughly that projects will be making final investment decisions? They're looking to get going by, I forget what the dates were, whether there's something by the middle of the decade and then 2030 and 2040.
Yeah,
when do you think they'll have to actually press the button?
Well, we're expecting, I mean, obviously the amount of funding that we're putting into the clusters, we're expecting them to get to the point where they can take a final investment decision by the end of the programme. So should they wish to do so. So we think they'll have done in most cases, the engineering work required to get to that decision point, either by March 2024 or sooner.
Yeah.
If they want to. I mean, it obviously depends on where the next stage funding is coming from, and it may be deemed advisable to slow down a bit. But, you know, the current plan is get the work done and hope some more money comes along in a timely manner.
And is there any plans you've got for the COP coming up, do you think?
Plans for COP, right?
Yeah, you know, I mean, it seems like you're going to have to get your projects and everything together and have a big.
Yeah, we're hoping to have some announcements and major presence at COP. Yes, but exactly what it'll look like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Obviously, plans that we put in place for this year have all been cancelled.
Yes.
So I don't know exactly what it will look like, but definitely we're planning a major presence there, not just from the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, but from many of the other industrial strategy challenge funds that impact on net zero as well. So we've got quite a lot of work on, for example, agriculture and impact on net zero and battery technology, various other things, which will all be there, we hope, but no guarantees. But certainly we'd expect, you know, ministerial announcements on, you know, how the deployment competitions are going, stuff like that, if we can possibly arrange that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that promises to be quite a big event, I think. How things are going. I think you said that you know, CCS seemed a bit more sort of popular. Do you think that's still the case? I mean, we've seen a big announcement on wind. Do you think CCS is still there?
Yes, definitely.
I mean, I expect the answer.
Well, I suppose the difficulty for me is I only talk to people who think this is a good idea, of course, but I don't see any signs that people are backing away from that. I mean, there's room for wind and, isn't there, rather than or.
Yes, I mean, it might change some of the bits at the margin on hydrogen and electricity in particular, I think. And then I guess something else that's come up with wind, I don't know whether it's been something that you've had to think about. UK content, has that come up very much? And do you think Brexit will make any difference on that? I suppose we don't know yet, really, do we?
I have absolutely no idea about Brexit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, UK content is something, you know, that I'm particularly keen on. So we have tried in our competition for cluster plans, for example, to make sure that the work's done here in the UK and any subcontracts are UK based. I think when it comes to these major construction projects, that's not really practical. But as far as possible, you know, we try to look at value for money for the investment that we're making on behalf of the taxpayer. And, you know, people want to see a significant amount of UK content.
And jobs, are there any jobs metrics in that? Or do you think?
Oh, yes. Well, all of the proposals will have included something that talks about what they're going to deliver in terms of jobs, skills. We've asked them to think very carefully about their impact on equality, diversity and inclusion in our latest competition. And what we're trying to do is, as far as possible, you know, leave a lasting legacy of you know, some newly skilled people and an idea of, you know, a closer idea of what new skills we'll be needing in the future.
Yeah, and do you think we're going to get a sort of a skills shortage, or do you think the country can repurpose?
I have no informed view. I mean, one reads various reports on the topic, and I don't really know if there's a clear consensus on that. I hope there won't be a skills shortage. I that would involve a bit of a stretch of the imagination, but some people do say, you know, if you try to construct all of these projects all at the same time, you're not going to have enough people to do that, and you know, it's a point of view. So, but I don't have an informed view. It's not my job to actually build these things, just to check people's proposals for building these things make sense, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting because certainly on the CO2 transport and storage side, you know, you'd hope to continue on from the North Sea oil industries, but whether there's actually a continuity of activity and businesses, I'm not sure. There's going to be a bit of a gap, isn't there, before the storage starts up anyway. Really. And have you noticed any sort of overseas interest in the sense of inward investment following CCS?
Yes-ish. So I suppose what we recognise is that many of the organisations involved in these clusters ultimately have international owners. So to the extent that they're participating in the programme means somebody somewhere has said, yes, we're going to make that investment. So that I think is very positive.
Yes.
In terms of direct investment into the later stages of actually building the infrastructure, I wouldn't be able to answer that, but I know people are seeking investment from various sources.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing, I've heard of rumours of examples to the contrary, but I was thinking more of industry coming to the UK because they know they can cap their sort of carbon exposure.
Okay, yeah, well, that's something that we see as one of the real drivers for the cluster plan development, to actually think about how they position themselves to make sure that happens. I mean, everyone has this aspiration, but actually delivering it is a quite complicated set of interactions, of course.
Yeah.
And but we do recognise that, you know, the goal of keeping these industrial regions as thriving, growing regions rather than collapsing regions will require new industries to come there and invest. So it's part of the plan.
Well, and quite a lot keeping the other ones there. But I had heard of, I don't know what industry it was, but somebody going to, I think it was one of the Netherlands clusters, because they weren't sure that they would get a CO2 pipeline in the UK at the time.
Okay.
It was a while ago. So, but that'd be good if that stops.
Mm.
And how important do you think research is in this? Do you think there's much sort of, at the moment, much technical?
You expect me to actually say there's no point in technical research, John? I really don't.
I actually wondered whether there was much, whether there was much thought about technical risk minimization in the short term or long.
Yeah, I think
about sort of cost reduction.
Yeah, I think the research arm of the programme is something that I think is of equal importance to the other two. So I mean, they're all vital to deliver them all successfully. I mean, as far as building infrastructure using technologies you already know, we're all very well aware that that process always throws up new research questions, as you talked about yourself, John, many times. So I think there will be stuff coming through, but I think the clear link between research and the clusters is really through the cluster plans, which are really intended to be much more ambitious. And because they're a really complicated entity, then I think there'll be scope for bringing in a lot of new approaches as to how they might set about designing the infrastructure that they need in the region. Mm-hmm. And, what is the link between, the waste heat from one process that somebody else can use and all kinds of circular economy considerations and whatever else they want to bring into play. So mm-hmm. I think that will throw up many, many interesting research opportunities and opportunities to implement stuff people have been working on, currently, because, they're making their plans over the next couple of years. Obviously, the planning doesn't stop at that point. Just because the funding stopped, they've got to keep those plans alive. But we really want them to be mindful of the need to keep engaged with the research centre and make sure there's a constant flow of ideas both ways.
Mm. Mm. Well, I mean, let's hope their funding doesn't stop at the end of the period, that they carry on, because I mean the cluster in particular won't have finished their work by then, will they really? Philip, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, John. Hi, Bryony. Nice to see
Hi.
You again.
You too.
I'm just picking up on, well, in some ways, your comment about knowledge sharing and particularly amongst UK partners, but also your slightly humorous comment at the beginning about UK's penchant for having the first, the biggest, the best of everything, and that sometimes works against knowledge sharing. I'm very impressed with, say, that the Norwegian approach to being very open and sharing everything through vehicles like Mission Innovation or CSLF, and the recent conferences they've been having on the Global CCS Institute. Is it part of the intention with these cluster projects to be very open and to share internationally through agencies like those, or is it really a case of fighting off, a bit like we did on previous competitions that went sadly nowhere, fighting off the need to knowledge share and keeping our powder dry in order to be the world leader and to get inward investment into the UK? How do you square those two somewhat contradictory directions of travel?
Well, I think the key thing for me is that all the work that was done after the unsuccessful £1 billion commercial competition said that one of the key elements by which we will get costs down is through sharing knowledge. And that is accepted by most people. And I do think that through this Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, one of the things we're able to deliver is a group of people who are doing something and other groups of people who would like that knowledge to be shared with them. There's not much point doing something if nobody else is interested. So I think the fact we got this community of clusters is really important. And so I think that's because I believe that knowledge sharing is actually important, not just as a nice thing to do, but it's the way we get costs down and share experience and deliver for the UK in the most cost-effective, efficient manner. I believe that we try to make clear to the cluster participants that we want that to happen. So we ask them specific questions in the competition documents about what are they going to share, who with, and when. So although I can't tell you the outcome of that, we have been very specific on who do you plan to share what kinds of information with, and will this be, right at the end of the project when people have lost interest, or throughout the project, and what sorts of events are you planning, and all this kind of thing. So we have got quite a lot of detail, and that makes me feel that we will have significant drive to share knowledge, which does not, of course, mean that commercially sensitive information is suddenly going to become shared and available to everybody. But, some of the stuff that's of generic use, I think people recognize that that actually knowledge sharing is a two-way thing, and because all the clusters are at similar sorts of stages of development now, they've all got stuff to learn from other people, and they've all got skills within their clusters that other people can learn from them as well. We're not really seeing, that you've got the kind of poor relations of clusters who don't know anything and the ones who are streets ahead of everybody else. They've all got their strengths and weaknesses. So I think there seems to be a real commitment to share knowledge. I know delivering that is not easy, and people say a lot of things and they don't deliver on them. But what I thought we'd do was ask them to write it down in their proposal so they could be as specific as possible. And then through our own monitoring of the projects, we can hold them to that as far as we can. It's an aspiration, I know, but we are doing our best to deliver it.
And I guess this might be the final question, unless anybody's got any others. Previous processes were called competitions. I don't think this one is a competition, but how much do you see the clusters as competing, and how much do you think they need to worry about competition, or do you think it's different this time?
Well, I think there is a strong competitive element in the deployment competition, of course. But I think the competition between clusters is going to be very interesting outside this funding, because they all seem to aspire to be, really moving forwards as rapidly as possible. And I think that does create some competitiveness. sort of positioning yourselves as, you know, the best area for inward investment and achieving net zero before anybody else and so on, which is great to see. And I think that is it's a strong element and should be encouraged, I think. But, you know, the competition between the clusters is something that's going to have to happen because there isn't enough money at the moment. So I mean, the competition is not necessarily between which ones ever go ahead. It's just really around which ones are going to go ahead first, since we know decarbonisation's got to happen everywhere.
Yeah, but I mean, it's, as you say, it's good to have some competition and people actually thinking they've got to do their best and being a bit forced and having more options than the minimum that we need. I mean, we'd be in a terrible situation if we only had one or two, wouldn't we?
Yeah, quite.
So that's pretty good. And also, you'd find life much more boring if you only had one or two.
Thanks for that. Yes. Yes. May you live in interesting times.
Well, but you know, I don't know whether you ever thought this, but it really would have been quite bad if, particularly in the first phase, you hadn't got so many takers. You'd have known that there weren't going to be many, but no, it's worked out very, very well. And I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, how many more companies have joined in?
Yes.
And I imagine there'll be even more when the projects actually come to FID too. So just hope that there's more money coming in, as you say, to feed it all. So I'll just ask one other question, Brian. I said that was the last one. When do you think the next time to have a good time to have a talk would be from you? When you think? So, well, I mean, you know, it's logical.
Well, it's entirely up to you. I hope that
next sort of big event or next because it obviously was a big event yesterday.
Yes, so I guess the main thing for me will be when we've announced all of the winners of all of the competitions, really, you know, so, you know, by the time we get through to March next year, we'll have the foundations, you know, to move forward with and moving into completely the next phase of delivery. So round about then is good.
Yeah, so it'll be a matter of, you know, just getting on with it and coming up with some good projects. And doing the parallel work to get the government funding there. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Good. Well, we'll send you an email. Thank you very much, Bryony. That's really great. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, but thanks again for the opportunity to speak. It's been great to be able to talk to you about what we're doing, as we're all really proud of the progress that we've made. And we're really looking forward to 2021. So thanks for the chance to tell you about that.
Yeah, very good. Karis, anything you want to say?
No, I just want to say thank you as well. I know it's a really busy time for you at the moment, so thank you for making the time today to come and speak to us. Just to give everyone a quick update on what we've got coming up next week. So it's next Thursday at this time, same time again, 3 till 4 o'clock. We'll be hearing from Dr. David Donacci from Imperial College London, and he'll be talking to us about adsorbent screening for CO2 nitrogen separations using temperature swing absorption. So we're going very technical next week, but we're looking forward to that as well. But yeah, thank you again, Bryony. That was great.
Thanks very much.
Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Bye.